Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brendiger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Rory Sylvia, and we're just meeting. We're learning that we have some common backgrounds, and we're going to find, I think, a lot to talk about, which I think you'll find very interesting. Thank you, Rory. So tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are, and what kind of motivates you.
Sure. Thank you, Ed. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too.
So let's see about me. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm a father. I've got a 2.5-year-old little girl who's just everything in my life, and I absolutely love being a dad. I never knew it would be this amazing.
It is.
Um, so that's kind of on the personal side, and I'm married. But on the work side, I have my own consulting firm called The Ways We Work, and the idea around that is that teams and organizations work the ways they do, typically because they've always done it that way, or
Mm-hmm.
because some leader told them to do it that way, or a manager came in and was like, okay, we're going to do things this way now. And they continue working in those ways, whether it serves them or not. And typically it doesn't serve them. And I think most of us, especially in like the corporate world, have had the experience where you might have had one or two just amazing managers who made your career, and you always think about that as like the highlight. And I think that's sad, because it shouldn't be that way. Like, it shouldn't be left up to these managers to make everything perfect. um, and I think kind of the common thread through all of this is intentionality. So if you're intentional with your ways of working, how you meet, make decisions, collaborate, include, hire, fire, you name it, everything that goes on in your business, if you're intentional with it, then you can have a culture that reflects your values and the values you say you want your company to have. But if you're not intentional, like it usually is, then you're kind of adrift at sea and you just kind of go wherever. And so an example of that might be, say you have an organization that says we value a growth mindset and learning from mistakes, except maybe the managers don't ever ask for feedback, or they do it in one-on-ones only instead of with the whole team there. And so you're not able to get kind of a shared consciousness and alignment around what is and isn't working, which kind of prevents you from doing anything differently. So you might say we have a growth mindset, we value this, but in reality you don't.
Interesting. I mean, you're addressing things that I've seen for decades. I mean, and it's sort of like people kind of find themselves in a job and they just kind of float through the job, and they don't really
Mhm.
think about the job. You get into a certain practice of the job, but there's never any advancement or any improvement in how they actually do the work that they do.
Yeah.
So
And
how
people always have great ideas, or they come come in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed out of college to a
yeah.
company, and they're like, hey, have you thought about doing this? And people are like, oh, we've tried that, or that won't work. And they're just told to like have an innovative mindset, but then their ideas, they get holes shot full of them constantly. And so they learn to just not bring their stuff forward.
So is an innovative mindset a is it a discipline, a personal discipline, or is it something that can be organized into the structure of the company?
I think both. I mean, it's is innovation something that you could, yeah, I think it's through your ways of working. It's a skill that can be developed and a muscle that can be grown and flexed. So if you, in your ways of working, for example, if you use retrospectives regularly, you
Yeah.
look at maybe every 3 months, your team stops and says, how have we been working together the last 90 days? What's working? What's not? And have a candid conversation about that. Then identifying, these things are working, we're agreeing on that. Of the things that aren't working, where are some opportunities? What are some experiments we could do to make that better? Well, if we have that in our operating rhythm, that retrospective, and then this plan to make things better, now we're embedding it into our ways of working. So it's going to be awkward at first, but over time, you're going to get better and better at it. You get more comfortable talking about feedback and the things that aren't working. You build trust on a team. And that's when things start to really take off. And then it's putting the focus on the team moving things forward instead of the manager. And I think we often kind of expect the manager to be the superhero doing everything, when in
Right.
reality you have this big beautiful team with awesome brilliant brains, and you want to use all of those brains and not just one.
So are we then saying that the role of manager is changing and it needs to be different than we thought it to be, which is very directive and controlling?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, my best experiences have been when I've been on a team where the manager is able to distribute some of that power and authority to the team. Let the team make decisions, let the team propose and
Yeah.
conduct experiments, let the team take part and drive the strategy, because you're going to have more ownership, you're going to feel more accountable, you're going to have more buy-in and find more meaning and purpose in your work if you have some control over it versus just someone telling you all the time what to do. And if I think about that personally, for me, if someone's just telling me what to do, like I naturally am like, like don't tell me what to do, like let me have some autonomy. But if people are like, hey, what do you think, now I feel part of things, and I want to help.
So if you're a manager that was trained and raised in the old model, and you're under pressure to produce,
Mm.
the people above you are putting pressure on you to produce, and you realize that what you've been doing is not working. How does that person begin to make the changes that are necessary in light of the fact that there's still these expectations to produce?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is one step at a time.
Oh,
Um,
that's
I,
good.
I think people typically want the silver bullet for culture or team effectiveness, but there isn't one, because people are complex and we're working in these super volatile and complex systems, and things are always changing. So your team culture and how things are working, it's going to be constantly moving and shifting,
Yeah.
which is why you've constantly got to go back and look at how things are. So I think a great place to start, if you're a manager who's feeling underwater, is with your team. What's within our control? Okay, starting with a retrospective, what's working and what's not, and then with the things that are within our control, what is one thing we can start doing differently to experiment with, for the next 60 days or for like 10 iterations, to give it time to get past the, like, this is stupids or this will never work or this is awkward, phase. But just starting with one thing at a time, and you'll start seeing change. But it doesn't make it not hard. It takes a lot of discipline and
Oh,
intention,
I
but
totally.
it's worth it.
So let's kind of look at the standard perspective of what a large say corporation is. It's siloed and it's compartmentalized, and you
Mhm.
can have a manager who does what you're talking about and it becomes very innovative and team based. But are, are is the danger that they will become isolated because they're not playing the game that has been set for everybody, which is you stay in your lane and you stay in your box and you do what you're told, and when you're beginning to be innovative, your world opens up and you see other opportunities, you see other ways of changing because you
Right.
have more people contributing to that process. So what do you do if you're kind of the initiator or the first out of the box to create this kind of innovative team-based group within a larger corporation? How do they manage that?
Like from like a team of teams perspective, or just
Yeah.
one person coming in and I've got this great idea.
Well, I think after the managers come in and begin has built his team, they're a very collaborative team and they're working well together.
Yeah.
But they're the outlier. They're the outlier in the company, and you know, and I guess what I'm really going to how does that team influence the people above them? That's really where I'm going, because
Mm.
that because what I have found is that the entrenched nature of power in organizations begins at the top and goes down, and that when you get down to the lower levels of the company, is actually more freedom to change because it seems like there's less at stake. But all the changes at the top seem to be heavily, there's a stake involved that a lot of leaders don't want to take on.
Mm. That's a great question. And like, every company has an operating system, the way things are done, the way leadership and people are incentivized. And I think if you don't have leadership on board, it's going to be a really, really difficult task. And at that point, you can focus on what's in your control, but you can't always you can't make a leader do everything. And I've experienced that when I've done this work as a part of a team before I had a consultancy, and we were doing all these great things and people notice and they come and see what you're doing. It's kind of like the big old viral video on YouTube a while back of like the dancing man at a concert, and he's dancing by himself. And then, more and more people come and they're like, what's going on over there? Like there's something in the water with these people and this team. And it attracts like-minded people and people who want to change. But I don't know. I don't know the answer for how do you get your leadership on board
Well,
when when they're incentivized
well,
against it.
here's the dilemma I see, and I think this is a reality that we who consult and we who look at businesses and corporations and are looking at how they grow, and particularly as they are today. And I'll, before I say what I'm going to say when I in from 1988 to 1995, I worked at a college, and at the end of my sixth year, I had my annual review, and the president of the college who I worked for told me, the board thinks you're being too presidential. And I've said, I'm not trying to be the president. I'm doing my job. But the energy that I was bringing to that, I think, was embarrassing to the president. I think that's really what it was. And that was my fault for not being sensitive to that. But I realized that I had lost her confidence and it was time to leave. So I think in the world of business today, there's a great competition for talent. So if you're a manager who is doing the kinds of things you're talking about, and you find that there's no support for you, it may be that you have to go somewhere where you find that support because you want to have a greater impact upon the business than just your team.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example there too. And for me personally, after I learned this way of working differently, it felt like, in the Matrix, I forget, Neo takes like the red pill or
Yeah,
whichever blue pill, and things have never been the same since. That's how it was for me when I learned to do this.
I love that
And
movie.
I could not do it. Yeah, it's a great one. I could not do this work wherever I go. And so after I learned to do this and I'm on different teams, I have like managers who say, hey, teach me this new way of working. And it takes a lot of courage to try something new, especially when you're under pressure. And my experience was that when I was internal to a team, I wasn't able to do that. And I can't, it's hard to coach someone who's above you if, they've got to really be willing to put pride on the shelf a little bit to be a beginner again. And it's a reason that I ended up going out to be a consultant, is I want to go work with people who are excited to change, who realize that there's a lot of opportunity and that they don't know everything. So they're going to have to try something differently.
And
So
that's
it's like,
exactly what I did.
I want to play with the people who want to play, and
Yeah,
I don't want to waste my energy with the people that don't want to play.
I did the same thing. I never been a consultant, never run a business, but that's what I went and did. And I haven't looked back. It was the wisest thing. Well, I think I'm curious as to how you see the world changing, because I think that the space that you're inhabiting as a consultant is really prime for the sort of things that people are beginning to become aware of. The pandemic hit and we all went into kind of isolation mode. And as we come out, people are saying, I want something different than what I had before. And they realize that there's something different that's possible because they worked from home for a couple of years. They realized, I don't have to work in that office. I don't have to do that. I can go look for something else. So it seems that, and I'm curious as to how you see what you see happening as these months and years now unfold after the pandemic. What you see is the openness for this kind of approach to working as a team or working as a company.
Like what can you clarify that question a little
Yeah,
more?
well, if people want to have a different way of working than they did 5 years ago,
Mm,
where they were just part of the system, part of the silos and the compartmentalized, but now they want something different. And I'm hearing this from other people. They're saying something is happening. That's the kind of the language. Something. Well, so what is happening? I don't know, but it feels different. And I'm
yeah.
thinking what feels different is that there is a greater emphasis on relationship than before. So if there's a greater emphasis or you have a greater desire for people to be in relationships of respect and trust at work, then how do we advance that? And I think that's a part of what you're talking about, which is that this is an idea whose time has come.
Mm. I hope it's an idea whose time has come, and I believe that we're on the front of change. Like you said,
Yeah,
COVID happened, and a lot of people got a taste of a different way of working, more autonomy, less being told what to do, and I think you're seeing more companies that are emphasizing performance based on outcomes versus butts and seats and hours sitting in your seats, and there's a lot of, I think, the companies that are saying, hey, we don't know everything and we're open to experimenting, like for example, Atlassian. They're doing, they say, like the biggest distributed work experiment in the industry, and they're all over the world working, and they're developing new tools and doing research on distributed work and what is the impact here. um, I think people have a lot less patience for companies that are saying, no, you need to come work here 5 days a week. It's not as equitable for women, for example. When you
yeah,
have more flexibility as typically the primary caregiver, you have more flexibility in when and how you do your work.
yeah,
People are going to want to work for the companies that do that. So it's a competitive advantage if you can figure out ways to work differently and allow teams to experiment. I think there's a big risk a lot of companies take when they say we're going to do this one way of working across our entire company, and they don't respect the different environments within their company. So they might say, hey, we're going to do lean for our whole company, or we're going to do agile for the whole company. And really, I would say, don't do that. Teach your teams and organizations how to really test and learn and have that kind of scientific mindset of what works best for our team. We don't know. We're going to figure it out and figure it out as we go. Those teams are going to have the most competitive advantage they're going to have. If you're talking about me, I guess the thread through all of this, I kind of mentioned earlier, is like intentionality and living intentionally. And I think the things that we're talking about here from like a team or organizational perspective, where you're really being intentional with the ways you're working to get a specific outcome, it's applicable to all aspects of life.
yeah.
And I think that's why this resonates with me so much, is like I've always been a kind of a self-development junkie, listening to podcasts to get little tidbits, doing little experiments to try new things that work in my life. um, but it's all about being intentional, because you try your best, and if it works, awesome, and if not, you tried your best and you can feel good about that. And so when I think about being a father, it's being intentional. I'm digesting a lot of content all the time to learn, how can I be the best parent I can be to help my child have good emotional regulation and, have as little childhood trauma as possible to be a well-rounded adult when she's older. Um, yeah, I think that's just the common thread, is like the intentionality, and yeah, I'm also obsessed with longevity, everything related to that.
You have a goal for how long you'll live?
Not how long, but I've been kind of a junkie of Dr. Peter Attia since I think about 2018, right before COVID. I started listening to his podcast. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not.
He's kind of really blown up recently. He came out with a book recently called Outlive, and it's like the art and science of longevity. And the idea is around, typically if the usual arc of life, if you had your axes here and, quality of life is up here and then length of life this way, you'd have start off with a really high quality of life and it goes along. And then like your marginal decade, the last 10 years of your life, it kind of has this decline that goes down. And then a lot of people are miserable during the marginal decade of life. And so the idea is, what can you do? What can you engineer and be intentional with through your lifestyle, starting earlier on, to make that quality of life curve come and then drop more precipitously, just really drop off at the end. So you're having a higher quality of life as long as possible. So that's around how much muscle you build and retain, based on data of how people commonly get hurt as they get older. And it's kind of reverse engineering how you want to be. So it's not like trying to live forever. It's having the best quality of life possible for as long as you can. So
yeah,
related to physical, mental, and emotional
well,
health.
I'm deeply into that.
Mhm.
I'm not deeply into the science of it. I'm deeply into the experience of it. Last summer I turned 70. I've never been sick. When I say I've never been sick, it's never. And then 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, all of a sudden, I lost hearing in my ear, in this right ear, just overnight. And as it turns out, there's an acoustic neuroma in this ear that is connected to the vestibular nerve, which also affects my balance. So my mobility was affected. And then, so it's a biomechanical problem. And then last summer, I began, off and on over the years, I've had a little pain in my hip, but it's always been about the stretching of the ligaments and the stretching of muscle. So this kind of Pilates type of things.
Right.
Well, this was different in this, and as it turned out, I had arthritis in my left hip, and I will have hip replacement surgery here in April. And there's some other issues related possibly to the back, but we don't quite know. So I'm suffering. I'm not complaining. I'm suffering from what you're talking about, because I have a plan to live to 105.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my plan is to publish my last book on my 100th birthday. I have a plan.
Awesome.
And I realized that I have to change my approach to the plan, be more intentional, using your language, be more intentional. So once this hip gets done, then I'm going to change my exercise regimen that I had, and begin to do what you're talking about. So I'm living in the midst of that. I call it the third half of life.
The third half.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're, making changes that are going to better serve you. And I'm sorry that you're going through that pain.
It's
You got
life.
to get the hip replaced. It's rough. And
yeah, it's life. You can. Well, here's what I learned. The first month that I had lost my hearing in this ear, I began to imagine what it would be if I lost hearing in this ear too. So I wouldn't have any hearing, and you and I couldn't be talking to each other like we are. And this is my life, which is having conversations with people, being engaged with people. And I became despondent. Unlike, I've never been despondent in my life. I was despondent, and I thought, it's my life over. And I reflected on that. And so I finally, it takes 2 months to get in to see the ENT, because the vertigo that I got set in the day before I was supposed to go see this doctor, and I was in bed with vertigo. So, but he told me, he says, I told him my fear of losing all my hearing. He says, I promise you'll have hearing the rest of your life. And that's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear. And so now I'm back to where I was, and And so what do you do on a daily or a weekly basis to address those sort of things? How are you acting on the commitments that you or the intentionality that you've made?
Yeah. Well, one thing that helps is like, I forget who said it, but I heard this author who writes about fulfillment talk about like his life goal is to maximize net fulfillment while minimizing regret. And I was like, yes, that 100%. I want that to be my goal. And I think it maps really nicely to being intentional. So for me, I'm 37 years old right now. I've got a kiddo. Um, and I want to be able to play with my kiddo my whole life. I'm really active now. I want to be able to do all the things.
Yeah.
So for me, I have specific fitness goals for working out at the gym and for cardiovascular goals. But then like every day I do a 20-minute mobility routine in the morning now to have good flexibility and strength in my ankles and my hips
So
and
for-
my joints because I want them to work as long as they possibly can. And I think especially with like desk jobs, we just get kind of stiff. And if we're not moving and using that range of motion, we lose it. And if you look at like little kids, infants, they have perfect mobility
yeah.
and strength within that. So it's like, okay, how can I move closer to that and keep that for as long as possible? And then the other part is since I started my business and left the corporate world, it was like this awareness of, oh, I was kind of playing the corporate ladder game. And that's not what I want to do. And now that I have a kid, my life revolves around my family and they're who I want to spend time with. And so when I go back to maximizing fulfillment and minimizing regret, I don't want to be on my deathbed saying I didn't spend enough time with my kids or
Yeah.
my family or doing the things that I love or skiing or surfing or scuba diving, all these things that I love. I want to say, yeah, I did all the things that I could and I feel really good about that. And
Since leaving the world of being an employee to now being in charge of your own business, do you feel freer as a person?
yeah, I mean, I have a lot of autonomy and it comes with challenges. The first year was the hardest and things are much better, financially now, which feels really good. But yeah, there's a lot more freedom. I still have to be intentional because when you're working in a company 40 hours a week, it's easier to be like, I'm not going to try as hard this week. I'm just not feeling it. But if I don't try hard in my business, then I don't make money. So there's great autonomy now, and it also comes with great responsibility. So I mean, it comes back to being intentional again. If I'm not, then I'm not going to feel good about what I'm doing. And yeah,
So let's end on some specificity. So when you work with a company, what is it that you're actually doing with them?
well, sometimes it might be just leading workshops. Sometimes people want, just a few hours or a half day or a day on, hey, can I start testing and learning? How can I start shaping culture? Which starts with just understanding what culture is, like company culture. I mean, it's really culture is the result of behaviors plus time. Behaviors over time equals culture. So, and then some tools to start with that. My favorite type of engagement, and I think most powerful, is when I can embed with a team. So anytime a manager says, "Hey, I want you to come and work with us for maybe 3 months, and come to our team meetings, meet with us twice a week, start teaching us to work differently." And I think that has the biggest chance of being successful and changing things because you're being actively coached. It's nice to have a coach point out behaviors that aren't serving you in a way that is not pointing the finger and saying, Ed, you were bad for that behavior. It's no, you've been socialized to do all these things and it's
Yeah.
not your fault. It can be better. Let's try this behavior instead.
Right.
So ideally, I'm working with a team or organization over time. It's really, I find just deep purpose and meaning in it, because initially I'm teaching and coaching more, but then as teams start doing things on their own, I can go into the background and just watch the collective light bulbs go off. And getting to experience that shared learning with the people that I'm working with it brings me so much joy. And yeah, that's kind of the goal. In the work wise, I just want to feel purpose and meaning and joy in the work that I'm doing.
That's fantastic. Well, I wish you well. I think what you're doing is important. And I mean, it's a piece of a bunch of different things that's now emerging,
Mhm.
which is all born around relationships and collaboration and being intentional, but being intentional together. I mean, that's
Mhm.
it's a new thought, I think, for a lot of people. How do we do that together? Uh,
Yeah.
it's I have hope for the future, even though I think we're going to go through some hard times. But I think out of hard times comes really sharpened capacities to do things. So I'm not worried.
Right. It's where
Too,
the growth comes. The
yeah,
discomfort and, as much as it might
yeah.
suck, it's like, okay, I'm gonna grow and learn from this.
Well, we'll put whatever you want to put in the show notes. We'll put that so people can find you and then maybe you know invite you in to do some work with them because I think what you're doing is really valuable and we need to celebrate it. And I mean, if you who are watching or listening, grasp this idea of building a team that's not just people sitting around a table, but actually where they're collaborating together and doing things together and thinking together and supporting one another. Where there's, I guess, mutual accountability would be a part of that too, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think something I didn't touch on is just when I first learned this, when I was actually on the global culture team at Boeing, when we first started out, we had, the typical issues that teams have: lack of transparency,
Yeah.
trust issues, not collaborating the best, not always in being inclusive. But as we started working differently, it built so much trust and self-efficacy, and it built the psychological safety because our ways of working demanded it. And we were on a completely distributed team across the United States and one in Amsterdam. And I've never experienced a better team environment in my life where I felt trusted and I get coached by my teammates. Like, where does that happen? So it can be your teaming experience can be everything you've ever dreamed and hoped for. But again, got to be intentional.
Well, I think it also says that wherever you are, you don't have to remain there. You can,
100%.
yeah, and it requires you being intentional about what you want and being willing to, I guess, put the effort in to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity to meet. And I look forward to hearing stories, out there in the great ether of what you're doing is and having an effect. Because what we'll find is that I think what we'll find is that people who have been on the podcast who have a similar approach to the way they work find themselves in relationship with other people. That's one of the goals is to create that kind of network of people. But that means that we're going to be spread across the globe doing things that are of a similar nature and have a long-term effect upon the world as a result. And that's exciting. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks for having me on. It was fun talking with you today.
It was good,
Yeah.
even though there was a little glitch in the middle when my computer stopped. But you might not know that by the time the editing gets done. But
Yeah. Well,
but it happened.
there's no perfect plan. So you just got to roll with it. That's okay.
So thank you. And
Thanks,
thank you
Ed.
all for watching. And please sign up and let us know that you're here. Hit the like button and leave a comment. And we always appreciate the comments that you leave, and appreciate that you were thinking and you were reflecting upon what the guests are saying as valuable to you, and you continue to show me that that's the case. So, see you later, Rory. See you all later here on the
Take
Ed
care, Ed.
Network podcast. Bye bye.